on renewable energy 2019. Okay, today we are going to explain you a little bit more about this call. We have prepared an agenda for the coming hour. But first, I would like to introduce you to our colleagues. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Adi Indri Hermano from Indonesia. That's our colleague from Ristek Dikti. Here we have Cora, my colleague Cora Govers. She's from NWO. Also joining Maaike Spiekerman from NWO. She's not now visible, but she's here. And I'm Arina Schrier, also from NWO. Our agenda will first focus a little bit on the aim and the background of the call and of the program. Then we will go into more detail about the general requirements of the call. Cora will explain more about the research for impact, about the theory of change and the impact pathways. And then we have available during the entire webinar a Q&A. So please send us your questions during this webinar in the chat room. This is right on the right side of your screen, I believe. You can just text your message to us, and Maaike will list these messages, and then we will go into this after the webinar. Okay, so the aim of the call. We started this bilateral cooperation because already in the past, Indonesia and the Netherlands worked together historically in science, and this new call is actually to strengthen our collaboration between the Netherlands and Indonesia. This is under the Sustainable Development Goals, so this is overcoupling to all of what we do in this program. We want to bring partners together because we are aiming challenges that are multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder. We want to bring the partners together, so not only scientists, but also people from society, from governments, decision makers, companies, and we want to do that to get impact and to go into these challenges in an effective way. We want to explore new development pathways together, and we want to find new ways to accelerate transitions towards sustainable development. Well, we would like to tell you a little bit more about the background of this call. We started actually our conversations already a few years ago, and Cora started this, I think, already in 2017. And then last year we decided to work together, Ristek Dikti and NWO, and we signed an agreement last year. And so this is the first year actually that we have our program running on this first call on renewable energy. As I said before, we want to strengthen our international position and global impact of our research. And we do that also to do everything in co-creation. So we have both our national agendas, which we bring together, and we look then what is the overlap and which themes are we going to work on. For the next 5 years, so that's the period 2019-2023, we work under the theme Resilient Society, and under this theme, we prepare every year a call with a different sub-theme. So for 2019, it's renewable energy. We both fund the research, so from both sides there's funding available. What we like to do is to build bridges between different actors in the knowledge chain. So from fundamental, as I said before, so from science to applied research, and we want to involve different scientific disciplines. Well, the thematic focus for this year is renewable energy. So as I said, we have compared our national agendas, and we both, of course, aim under the Sustainable Development Goals for a transition to sustainable and low carbon energy systems. And that involves both technical aspects and social aspects. As I said, it's important on all of these themes, but also for renewable energy, to work interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary to address the challenges related to renewable energy. We have defined 3 focus areas, but it is not limited to these areas. But I want to mention you the 3 focus areas where we have agreed on. And that is clean, low carbon biofuels, clean, low carbon energy technology in general. So that can be any technology related to solar or wind energy, geothermal energy, hydro, can be any technology. And the third one is energy storage and conversion and transport.
Okay, so I will. So we're quickly changing. Hi. So the general requirements for the projects will be funding 2 projects at the end of this. So that is projects done by consortia of Indonesian and Dutch researchers. There's a maximum of 700,000 euros available from NWO and a maximum of 400 million rupiah per work package led by an Indonesian work package manager. But Pak Adi will tell some more about that in the next slide. The consortia should consist of a Dutch and an Indonesian principal investigator. So there should be 2 principal investigators. There should also be a public and or a private practitioner partner. So this is an NGO, a company, a local government, someone who will actually bring your research into practice. And on the Indonesian side, there should be several Indonesian work package managers. The public and or private practitioner partner can be from either Indonesia or the Netherlands, that doesn't matter. And very important are the deadlines. So the 3rd of September at 2 o'clock, you must have submitted a letter of intent. This must be signed by the Dutch and the Indonesian principal investigator, and it should be sent to indonesia-nl@nwo.nl, the email address that you can see on the presentation, by the Dutch principal investigator. So this letter of intent is very important. Because if you do not submit it, your application will not be eligible. And on the 17th of September is the deadline for the full proposals. Again, this is at 2 o'clock. And they must be submitted by the Dutch principal investigator through his or her ISAAC account. And we'll go into that a little bit more later. So, Pak Adi?
Yep, thank you, Bu Mix, Bu Cora, Bu Arina. I'm Adinda Hermanu. I'm from the Ministry of Technology and Higher Education, and we conduct this program with NWO. And then I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, for the Indonesian requirement, of course, like what you see in the presentation slide, that you must follow the Indonesian side. I mean, you must follow the guideline 12 version of 12. Our in Simultamas, you must for Indonesian participant, you must familiar with this. And I want to tell you about the general. Of course, must the Indonesian citizen and hold a permanent or fixed term contract in the eligible university or the research institute of Indonesia. And then because this from the BOPTN, so the PI must be the university researchers. So must come from the university. And then competent in oral and writing skill, and then receive permission from the employing higher education institutional. or university to as the administrator of the grant. And then, of course, meet the minimum term and condition of the grant for international cooperation. And then, as a PI, you must coordinate the work package manager, not only the substance but also the administration. So we are in Indonesia must make a consortium consists more than 2 work packages up to 5 or 6 or 7 based depend on the 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 project. And then for the number of the platform budget, you have to follow the Ministry of Finance regulation, what we call SBK, as the maximum standard of the budget for each VP. So if you have 4 or 5 VPs, each VP can be funded up to 400 million rupiah for each WP work package. And then also, sorry, non-university, you can join this program, but you as the member, not the PI or not as a work package manager, because our funding will go to the work package manager. And then you have to follow also the rule of the ministry regulation about the standard of input to as a standard for the component. And we can only fund for the consumable material, ticket, lump sum, meeting, and the honorarium for the assistant. We cannot fund the salary. We cannot fund for the modality, and we cannot buy salary, of course. And then, of course, the awardee selected proposal funding will be subject to the assessment by respectivity. So your proposal budget will be evaluated more with our reviewer after you will be after you announce as the winner. And then I think this is all for me, Bu Maker. If there is any question, I will answer later. Thank you.
Great. So if you have any questions about that, please send them to the chat box. From the Netherlands, the requires for the Dutch principal investigator, and this is also in the call for proposals, is that he or she be a senior researcher from an eligible research institute, and those institutes are again listed in the call for proposals. This means the bullets that you see here, so an employment contract for the duration of the assessment procedure and the project, a PhD or equivalent, and if you're wondering what that equivalent is and if it's applicable to you, send us an email and we can check. An exemption is if you're on a tenure track. A University of Applied Science can be a co-applicant, but not the main applicant. The project can apply for a maximum of 700,000 at NWO. And the NWO grant rules for 2017 are applicable to the part of the project's budget covered by the NWO grant. So your proposal will be assessed according to 3 criteria: the quality of the research proposal, the quality of the consortium, and the potential scientific and/or societal breakthroughs. All criteria carry equal weight, and they've been operationalized in the call. So there are sub-criteria to each of these. These are good to keep in mind while you're writing your proposal as well, because that's what your proposal will eventually be assessed on. A little bit more about the selection procedure. Again, it's important that you submit that letter of intent 3rd of September, 2 o'clock, to the Indonesia NL email inbox. We won't be checking these for eligibility other than having been submitted on time by the Dutch principal investigator. But we will read through them and see, for example, if you're missing a public practitioner partner, we'll email you and be like, hey, you're missing a consortium member that you're supposed to have, just so that you have time to remedy that before submitting your final application. When you submit your final application, you'll have to be submitting it through the account of the Dutch principal investigator in Isaac. We highly recommend that you start doing that 5 days before the deadline. This is because you will have to enter all your co-applicants as well and your Indonesian principal investigator in Isaac. And if their organizations are not yet in Isaac, you will have to ask our IT department to enter them in Isaac so you can select them. So because of this, we recommend that you really start on this on time. Once your proposal has been found eligible, it will be submitted to external reviewers. And the reports of those external reviewers will then be made available to the Dutch principal investigator, who will have to share them with the Indonesian principal investigator and the rest of the consortium. The consortium as a whole will then have the opportunity to write a response to those reports. So to clarify any points that the reviewers may have made or answer any criticisms. That response must then again be uploaded through the Isaac account of the Dutch principal investigator. So then the application, the reviewer reports, and your response will be submitted to an international advisory committee that NWO and the District Dictie will create. This international advisory committee will assess all the applications in competition and then make a funding advice to NWO and the District Dictie. The NWO steering committee and the accredited officials at the District Dictie will then check that the procedure has gone according to the call for proposals and make a provisional decision. And when they come to the same decision, the decision will be final. And I'd like to hand over to Cora.
Okay, I will continue. It's nice to see you started chatting already. And can I ask you to please chat in English so that other people can see what your questions are and so that they do not repeat the same questions. But if you chat now, it's easier for us to already collect your questions and answer them better afterwards. But I will continue with research for impact because, as has already been explained, this bilateral collaboration, the societal relevance of research is very crucial. And what we have as starting points in this collaboration is that societal relevance does not compromise the quality of the research. It actually can reinforce itself, but also that societal relevance does not come about automatically. You really have to work on it. Otherwise, it will hardly happen at all. And to do so, it needs to be prepared, shaped, planned. And for that, we have developed an approach, and I will get into that approach now. To give an example from WOTRO funded research, WOTRO is a department of NWO. We've been working on societal relevance of research for decades now, and always we've had the question, but social relevant research often is not as good scientifically speaking. So we asked for a report to be written based on the output of WOTRO funded research. And to our joy, and reinforcing what we already thought, is that actually the societal relevant research can be as excellent or even better than other research, because it came about that WOTRO projects are cited more often, they have a higher impact, and 16% of the WOTRO articles belong to the top 10 publications. So this is to prove that societally relevant research can be excellent as well. Now, what are our general assumptions when we look at research relevance? And that is that a distinction between fundamental and applied research is not always fruitful when we are looking at impact of research. And also because there is some kind of gray area where fundamental and applied research actually are quite close or almost meet. What we also firmly believe is that to address societal challenges, it needs inter and transdisciplinary research. And transdisciplinary research means that you also involve actors from outside academia. And also a general assumption is that other types of knowledge than scholarly knowledge are often valuable too. And I will get into these aspects later on. But the main issue is that when you want to have a successful research for impact, you need an integrated approach. And that integrated approach, according to our bilateral collaboration, has 3 aspects, and I will get into each of them further down. But the first aspect is related to co-creation by transdisciplinary teams. It rests on a theory of change and impact pathway that should be developed in the proposals and accompanied by an impact strategy that you should also develop. And what is important in this approach is that you start working on this approach with the private and public partners from the proposal development phase onwards, which means you need to start now already, including your partners in developing your proposal. The theory of change is actually the basic of your impact strategy. And a theory of change means that you write about what you want to achieve, what do you want to achieve with your research, and in the short and long term, and what assumptions do you have. And the assumptions part is really crucial for developing your theory of change as well as your impact pathway. There are different categories of assumptions. They can be about cause-effect relations. What is the cause and what is the consequence? They can be about the paradigms you use. They are of influence on your research. Also related, what we not always may think about, is the world views and the belief systems in the societies they are studying. They are influencing your research. They have their assumptions. It is about the context. What do you choose about the context as being relevant for your research? You could look at that as an assumption as well. And it is about strategy and implementation in when you are implementing your research, your impact. You also have assumptions about why you take a certain approach. And I cannot address enough how important it is to be explicit about these things. And the nice thing about working in a transdisciplinary team, that it's often more easy to point at an assumption of somebody from another field than your own. So in this way, you may help each other to become more reflexive about what you are doing. Well, the whole theory of change is based upon your whole proposal, as it were. The one proposal you are going to write. You start with a problem area that you want to address, in this case related to energy. But energy is, of course, broad, so you choose a specific topic within your research that you want to address, and you will also look at what you want to achieve with addressing that area, the impact. So you can see a loop in this theory of change, but when you are developing your proposal, it does not always following the loop as is mentioned here. This is what you do when you are doing your research, but when you're writing your proposal, you may start with the problem area and the impacts before going down to the other aspects. Because you address your problem area, you want to write about also quoting different scientific studies. What are the causes, according to you and your team, of the problem area that exists? What are your assumptions here? Then you go to the underlying knowledge-related causes. So what is basic about what you are trying to study? And from that, you will start building your context analysis, your research questions and design, your methodology, and then your theory of change. And this will result in setting out in your proposal, your project activities with the risk assessment. Following from this, you will build your impact pathway. And as I already explained, often you will start with your impact and go back to what output would we need that comes from your problem analysis and the way you made your proposals. What output will you develop that contributes to the intermediate outcome, the outcome and the impact. So you start building your impact pathway that way. And while doing that, you always have to start reflecting on the assumptions you are having. And especially also, that is the most crucial part of an impact pathway, is the reflection and the revision you will do while doing your research. You write it now, you submit it, but it's not something that should be dead on paper, but that should be used during the execution of your project as a reflection on where you stand in your research. So, as I said, you go from output to outcome to impact, though while writing your proposal, you may do it the other way around. When we talk about output, outcome, impact, there's of course many definitions at work, and we have chosen some that we want to put forward to you because they are important in how you look at what output is. Of course, we also look at output as what you list in your CV or what you have to upload on ISAC or on the Indonesian side as a result of your research. But when we are looking at an impact pathway, we mean with output the insights in this list of outputs and not the output list as such. So it is about the insights that you achieve. The outcome relates to changes in behavior, in relationships, in actions, activities, in changes as a result of those insights. And the changes are in your stakeholders, in your environment, and in what you achieve via your research uptake. Now, the gap between output and outcome is rather big to go from insights to changes. And because in a project, you will not always reach that outcome level at outcome level in all cases or for all the subjects you are dealing with, we have included, based on our experiences, an intermediate research outcome as an in-between step. Because the intermediate research outcome does happen in your project, and these relate to the positive steps already taken that may not have already resulted in change, but that have shown an interest in what you are doing and in achieving the next step. The big picture change relates to impact, and we all know that that is usually further away on the horizon, though sometimes projects can have impact even in a short period of time. But what is, I think, important to remember is that you have to have that vision on the horizon to be able to even relate to your output and outcome. Now, to make it a bit more perhaps clear to you, we've made some examples from other research. Perhaps in a few years, we can use examples from previous bilateral calls. Now we stick to other research. And this is just for you to understand what we mean by output. When you look at this example about gender, the output is not an article in which gender-specific obstacles and constraints are mentioned, but the insight. So the insight is that a certain group the women food entrepreneurs have gained a basic understanding of the gender specific constraints and obstacles that those groups did come across. And I'm not going to go into what those obstacles were, because what I want to show you here is that when we talk about an output and we ask you to to define output in your impact pathway, you have to start thinking along these lines of what insights do you want to achieve. An intermediate outcome. In this example, there has been an unexpected outcome is that for dairy extension, the Dutch embassy got interested in supporting an expert meeting. So the intermediate outcome here is the interest of the Dutch embassy in supporting this meeting. A second intermediary outcome could be, if it was mentioned, is the interest of women to attend that meeting. So we do not see a change happening yet, but we already see an interest in your subject. And that is the intermediate outcome. And an example of an outcome is related to Solidaridad, who implemented change into their normal affairs. So that is actually what you want, is a more constant change happening. And Solidaridad did do so by changing their programming in following from a research project. So that is what we are all looking for, that partners, institutes, policymakers will change what they are doing according to your project's advice or insights. Now, outcome of research has many dimensions, and we listed them according to 3. And outcome can relate to conceptual changes. So that means that we understand things differently. We've raised awareness, and people have started thinking differently as a change. Another change is can be instrumental. So a policy has been changed, an intervention changes, a practice changes due to your research. And one of the fundamental things that also come back into the research uptake is capacity development as something very important for change to be brought about. People need the appropriate capacity to be able to handle that change. And that means that to build the capacity of the stakeholders or end users is a very important outcome aspect. Now, you will be asked in your proposal, next to your theory of change and impact pathway, you will be asked to design your research uptake or approach as an impact strategy. And your research uptake includes all the activities throughout the entire research. So what is fundamental about this impact strategy is that it starts from the beginning of your project and not as an afterthought. It should be integrated throughout your whole project, how that project will be used. And the use will start while doing the research already and not at the end. And it has this research uptake has 4 main strands that I will come back to in the next slide. And it is related to different types of stakeholders. We call them the inner circle, and that is the consortium partners and the very direct stakeholders related to your project. And there is an outer circle, and those are the wider networks your research would be interesting to. And your research uptake approach should relate to both the inner circle and the outer circle. And do not forget, also in your impact strategy, it is important to think about your assumptions and why are you doing things? What do you presuppose when you are developing your impact strategy. As I mentioned, there are 4 main strands of research uptake, and the first one is stakeholder engagement. And a stakeholder engagement means that you start thinking when developing your proposal, and especially when starting your project, you will continue to do so. What are the most appropriate stakeholders for this research? So you have to make a stakeholder analysis. And it is advised to do so, especially after your project is granted, with the whole team, to really do a more detailed stakeholder analysis of the most appropriate ones for your project, and to keep doing that along the way. And for your proposal, you will do so in a preliminary way. You also will start thinking about capacity development. And for us, that means that you assess and you strengthen the capabilities of stakeholders, consortium members, and users to do research uptake, or to say it differently, to use your research results. Communication, that means about availability, relevance, and accessibility of the research results. And this, especially your communication, should be directed at both the inner and the outer circle, and will need a different strategy, whether it is for the people who are more closely related to your project, or to other groups who would be interested in your research. The final aspect, the monitoring and evaluation, is quite crucial. I already mentioned when discussing the impact pathway that a revision is important. This is integrated into the research uptake, your impact strategy, as the 4th aspect, where you continue to monitor and evaluate your research uptake, the results so far, what do we need to change based on what you know while doing the research. And those changes in your impact strategy should also result in looking at your impact pathway and changing your impact pathway accordingly. Now, the big summary of it all is a way of looking at all this, because we often have the question, yes, but what is the accountability of it all? Well, to stress is that the learning loop of your impact pathway and impact strategy is more important than the accountability, because the learning is the basis of your relevance of your research. But of course, there are different ways where your project can have influence. So the output is the sphere of control of the project. So this is what we can expect from you. Your output can change from what you mentioned in your proposal, but then you would have to report on it and see why did we change the output that we envisioned from the start. But that is the sphere of control of your project. You are accountable for that. And that is where knowledge co-creation and research uptake starts. The outcome is your sphere of influence. So we expect you to influence the outcome, but obviously you do not control how other people change. So you are not accountable for the outcomes as such, but you are accountable for how you influence outcome to happen, how you support it, how you facilitate it. Then the impact we call the sphere of interest, that is what you love to see, but you don't have any control of it because there's so many aspects influencing this impact. But it is something on the horizon that you work towards. And we all know that if you do not have that conscious steps, and if you do not work on those steps, nothing will happen. So it is part of the whole idea of an impact pathway to work on what you would love to see happening.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Cora. Okay, let me see the timeline. Well, Micah explained already a little bit the timeline. So the letter of intent is required on the 3rd of September, 2:00 afternoon. The deadline for the full proposal.
And what time is it? Afternoon European time?
Yeah.
European time, 2:00. Time different with Indonesia, then is 5 hours, I think, depending on where you are. But yeah. The deadline for the full proposal is the 17th of September. In the period September-December, we will ask the referees to review the proposals. Then at the end of November, the beginning of December, we expect the response of the referees. Actually, before it goes to the referees, we will do an eligibility check on the full proposals. Then January, February, we will have the committee meeting in Jakarta. Then February, the final decision will be made by the WOTRO steering committee and the Ristek-Dikti officials. And then end of February, beginning of March, Ristek-Dikti and NWO will inform the applicants. And end of June, at the latest, we want the projects to start. Also end of June, there will be a big meeting in Indonesia and Jakarta, where we will plan the kickoff workshops for these projects. Okay, then Micah collected the questions from this webinar. We have about, I think, 10 questions. And Micah, do you want to sit here or stay there?
I'll move over a little bit.
Okay. Can you move a little? Yeah. Or you can.
This way. This way I can see it.
Yes.
So if you have any other questions that you haven't yet typed, please feel free to also send us those. First question is whether the slides will be made available on the website later. You will indeed be receiving the slides. Also, when this webinar ends, you'll receive an email, and in that email, the slides will be attached. So you will be receiving the presentation. There is a question regarding whether a full application should be written and one application submitted to both NWO and Ristek-Dikti, or whether those should be two different applications. For the assessment process, it's one application, but only submitted to NWO, and NWO will share the application with Ristek-Dikti. So it's only the application that's submitted to the through the account of the Dutch principal investigator. If your project is awarded, at that point, the Indonesian principal investigator will have to make sure that the work package managers each submit their work package to Ristek-Dikti, so that Ristek-Dikti can award the grants for those work packages.
But in the proposal, you will already have to budget both the Indonesian and the Dutch budget. So it is already written for both donors, for both funders.
There is a question about the deadline. We're aware that the deadline for this call is very short. We've already taken steps to ensure that that's not the case for the next call. Unfortunately, at this point, that's unfortunately the way it is. There's also a question for Cora.
Yes.
Can you provide more examples of the correct interpretation of the theory of change? Can you give more examples of output and outcome?
More examples of output and outcome. That would be going very far now, but maybe we can do it under the questions and answers. What I would like to stress is that the output is about insights and not about lists of output. So you do not mention a book, you do not mention the activity itself. You can list them through ISAC, but what you mention is what happened and what new insights were derived in that output. So if you talk about a training, you do as an output, you do not mention, oh, we had a training and we had 150 participants. But you mention what the training was about and what the participants of that training did learn. So, for instance, if you talk about biofuel second generation, you could have as a training how people could collect certain waste in their village. You could train about that. So then the output is not we did a training on waste, but in the training, people learn to differentiate between different types of waste and the ones that would be useful for biofuels, just as an example. Outcome also in normal language can mean results, the outcome of research, which means the research results. But the outcome in an impact pathway is not related to the research results as such. But the outcome in an impact pathway is about change happening. So to continue that example that I use about biofuels and waste, the outcome there would be when in a village, for instance, a whole system is set up and people actually start collecting their waste in different ways, separating what is useful and what is not useful for energy, as an example. And I hope that this is useful. I think on the website there's more explanation about this whole approach.
There is a question regarding when the deadline would be for the Ristek-Dictie application. So again, you're submitting for the assessment process one application through the Dutch Principal Investigator. That is an application that includes both what you're going to be requesting from NWO and from Ristek-Dictie. You won't have to submit anything to Ristek-Dictie until the decision about awarding has been made. And Pak Adi, perhaps you can give more information when the decision for awarding has been made. How long will the work package managers have to submit to Ristek-Dictie?
Yeah, like explanation that the Indonesian PA do not must submit the proposal to our system, but we wait until the announcement of the winner. So soon after the winner announcement, we will contact the PI and the Indonesian PI, and then the Indonesian PI must coordinate their WP manager to submit the system to submit their proposal to our system in Famas. So soon after the winner announcement in February.
Thank you.
Can I add to make it very clear, when you submit your proposal to ISAC, you actually submit it to NWO and Ristek-Dictie. We use one portal for both funders to begin with.
There is a question regarding getting the full reference for Anderson 2006 on the theory of impact. We can give that reference. We'll include it in the frequently asked questions, which we'll be posting on the website after this webinar. So you'll be getting that from us. There's also a question regarding the scope of renewable energy, and specifically regarding biomass. Adina, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, so the scope of the renewable energy call is quite broad. So it is not limited to the three topics I mentioned before. So the question on, for example, biomass as a renewable energy, yes, that is within the scope. So it's, so it's broader than the three points I mentioned. But these are identified as three overlapping interests of both Indonesia and the Netherlands.
Okay. There's a question for Pak Adi. Is there a maximum budget for the Indonesian side of the consortium that they can budget per proposal?
Yes, actually there is no maximum WP for each project. It depends on the need. but for every WP must follow the regulation of the Ministry of Finance, what we call SBK, the maximal standard of the output-based research. It depends on the process of the TRL, technology readiness level, where the research is on basic research or the applied research, but also depend on the subject. I mean, it's different if the work package go to the social research or the engineering of energy research. Different. So you must follow the SDK finance ministry regulation.
Thank you, Pak Adi.
Yep.
There's also a question, is it correct that for the Dutch side of the consortium, the co-applicant is not mandatory? So the consortium in its entirety should consist of an Indonesian principal investigator, a Dutch principal investigator, a public and or private partner who can be from Indonesia or the Netherlands, and then the Indonesian work package managers. Those are the mandatory consortium members. If you have a second Dutch co-applicant, that's great, but it's not mandatory. Are there any other questions? I see.
There was one in the beginning, a comment.
I think you miss the key question. You have to go earlier.
Yeah, Ms. Sorry, Arina answered that question about the scope and the particularly about biomass.
But if you want to add, Adi, then go ahead.
Yes.
I think it's clear in the context that biomass can be as a subject of object of this proposal, yeah, Bu, yeah.
Okay.
So it is okay for the biomass.
Okay.
Great. Did you have this point?
Yes, there was a comment about the criterion of the consortium, and in this short period, already Micah mentioned this period is shorter than we would normally envision, so in the next years that will hopefully be revised. But just to mention, this is obviously what all the proposals and all the teams are dealing with. So it is about how you can still manage in this period of time, and obviously committees will understand that in this short period you will not have a great deal of time to develop certain parts of your proposal in co-creation. So, but you could mention then in the proposal how you want to remedy that after you would have the grant. You can also mention the steps that you would take afterwards to fill in the gap that you have now in this short period of time.
Okay. Oh, I see another question. There's another question about the budget has to be submitted per proposal. So in the application format, you will see that there's a space to fill in the budget that you're requesting from NWO and the budget that you're requesting from Nistek-Dikti. So in that application format and in the Excel budget format that you have to complete for NWO should be the budget for your project as an entirety. And that includes, for example, on the Indonesian side, all the budgets for all the work packages that you'll be requesting from Nistek-Dikti. So you're submitting your budget for the entire proposal.
In euros for Indonesia?
And it says in the application format which parts need to be in euros and which parts need to be in rupiah. Then there's a question about the name of the PI in the letter of commitment. So in the letter of, I think you might mean the letter of intent that you need to submit by the 3rd of September. So in that letter of intent, it needs to be signed by the Dutch and the Indonesian PI. So both of them should sign it. You can obviously sign it electronically because it's kind of far away. So it should mention both. the Dutch and the Indonesian PI, and the Dutch PI should then submit it to the email address of the program. For the letter of commitment, if there is a question about that, what the letter of commitment is just a confirmation from your organization, so your faculty at the university or your boss at the NGO or the department head, that you will be given the time to work on this project, and that any in-kind or in-cash financing that's promised will be delivered if your project is awarded. So that should be given for all consortium partners, so the PIs, the co-applicants, and the collaboration partners and the work package managers. We have time for a few more questions. We have 5 more minutes. Just also, we will be collecting your questions and making a document of frequently asked questions that we'll be sharing with you and putting on the website. And this webinar is being recorded, so we'll also be sharing the recording with you later. There's a question, in that case, I assume that the letter of intent should be signed by the dean or managing director and not by the PI. So the letter of intent and letter of commitment are 2 different things. The letter of intent is just from the PIs who need to sign it, saying, yes, we are planning to submit this proposal. This is just for us to know how many proposals are coming in and who will be submitting them.
And
so
that is with the deadline shortly.
That's with the deadline of the 3rd of September. So
yes.
Those need to be submitted, need to be signed by the PIs. The letter of commitment is included in your full application, and that should indeed be signed by the head of your department or the dean or whoever is allowed to sign such letters. So letter of intent with the deadline of 3rd of September should be signed by the PIs on Indonesian and Dutch side. Letter of commitment should be submitted with the full application and should be signed by the head of the department or faculty or organization. Okay, if there are no further questions, then that will be it for our webinar. Oh, I see one more person typing. Yes, we have 3 more minutes, so if you have any questions that you think that you'd like to have answered now, this is your chance.
Also from the Indonesian side, please ask details to our colleague Adi about the procedures.
Yeah.
Yes, you can always email us.
Yes, you can also always email us afterwards. You can see the email addresses in the screen here, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.
So,
There's someone else typing.
oh.
Can the consortium agreement submitted with the full proposal be different than the consortium agreement signed after the proposal has been approved? Yes, you are. So when the advice is final about who will be awarded, you will be given a chance, or you'll be asked to submit a final version of your consortium agreement. So you are allowed to change it after that. Obviously, it has to still be conform the NWO grant rules and the Stakeholder grant rules. But you are allowed to change it after that if things have come to light or you need to amend it slightly for all partners.
If it's not too substantial.
Yes. So there is an option to amend it after the award has been given. You will need to submit the signed version before you will be given the first tranche of money, though.
Okay. So I think that's it.
Yes, we will have to say goodbye and thank all the participants.
Yes.
Okay. And our colleague from NWO and Indonesia. You want to add something, Adi?
Thank you for the attention from participants, and we hope that you can submit the proposal. We wait for your proposal until September. So just submit.
Okay.
Good luck, and if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to contact us.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay.